notes.
How do I send this to
You probably
my computer?
Yeah, try airdropping. Is your airdrop on?
Yeah. Bam. I got it.
Boniqua. Odita.
Bonica.
Excuse me.
We live broadcasting from Life Touch Massage.
Somebody excited to say that.
Yeah. So we're broadcasting from our sponsor, Life Touch Massage, where relief is only a touch away. You can catch us at 1223 2nd Avenue South, Birmingham, Alabama, 35233 in the University Park District. If you want to go to the website, lifetouchal.com, give us a call, 205-718-5144.
Thank you for that sponsorship,
Yes.
Lemar.
Remember, with Life Touch Massage, relief is only a touch away.
So, we are recording our podcast live. Tuesdays is our typical night for recording a podcast. And we're about to get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Boom.
So, I'm your host, Tiffany Story.
And I'm your host, Lemar Story. Thank you and welcome for joining us. Hey, Nicole, how you doing? What's up, family? Welcome for joining us.
Welcome to Living the Stress Life podcast. And we are on what episode? Episode 11? I think we're on episode 11. We got
I thought we was on episode 12 last time.
No.
Hey.
So we are getting ready to wrap up season 2 of Living the Stress Life podcast, and we decided we're going to start going live when we record our podcast. That happened about 5 minutes ago when Lemar came in with his iPad and was like, "Yeah, we're going to start recording live."
One of the reasons we want to record live on Facebook also is because we have a lot of our followers that gotten a little confused. They thought we weren't recording the podcast anymore, but they were referring to the Facebook Live as the podcast. We actually have a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher called Living the Stressed Life with Edie. And you'll see a beautiful picture of myself.
With Edie on the end of stress.
Edie on the end of stress. You'll see a beautiful picture of myself. Oh, and Tiffany. She's on there too. She's... But it's called Living the Stress Life. Please subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher to our podcast. We will really appreciate that. And we're going to start doing Facebook Live too because we want to communicate with you. Some of the topics that we have, we get a lot of feedback, and it'll be nice to have instant feedback so we can address your questions right then and there. I think it'll just make it a little bit more interesting. It'll make the podcast more interesting.
Yeah.
And we can have a little bit more fun with this.
And more dialogue. So for those of you who are sitting at home, tuning in, appreciate it. Cool. So what are we talking about today, Lemar?
We're talking about barriers to effective communication in marriage. And one of the reasons we chose this topic is because pretty much we're going through it. You know, our podcast is about living through the stresses in life. And right now, we're each other's stressor in life right now. So this is helpful for us.
Pretty much.
And hopefully it'll be helpful for you. But we're trying to actually figure out what is the barrier in our communication right now. We're typically really good communicators with each other. But I think different phases of the moon affects us differently. And then sometimes a wolf or a vampire or something comes out in each one of us, and then there's like a lot of fighting, and then everything is kosher, and then it happens again. It's like a cycle. So right now,
okay,
you know, my wife is a werewolf right now, so
I'm the only wolf. Go figure. Blame it on a black woman. So I think for me, it's important to really focus on getting past the barriers in your communication in your marriage, because a lot of times people think that big things such as infidelity or money issues or gambling or addictions are the only things that tear up marriage. But,
right.
you know, if you've ever heard this saying that it's the small foxes that spoil the vine, a lot of times there can be something that's little, that's a big problem, big problem in your relationship. And I think for us, the number one barrier in our relationship is our inability to understand each other at various times. There are times where communication goes really well with us and we seem to understand each other. We seem to be thinking the same thing at the same time. Like sometimes we can finish each other's thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other times where when we are getting ready to answer a question like which way should we turn to get to this store, at the same time I'm saying right, he's saying left, and both of us believe we are truly right.
Yeah, and she don't know her right from left. Go figure.
Anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is,
see, like typically she would laugh at that. It ain't funny right now.
No, it's not. So there are just times where we just not on the same page. And, you know, I was thinking about this earlier when I was riding over to meet Lemar to do the podcast, that he comes up with this.
You thought about turning around?
Well, no. He comes up with this saying that Steve Harvey told him. Oh, never mind. That Steve Harvey told him he could either be right or he can be happy. And so that bothers me because to me what it says is that there are times where you're sure of yourself that you're right, and for the sake of keeping peace, you still on this recording, Lemar. For the sake of keeping peace, you allow the other person to feel like they're right, even though you know they're wrong. And so I don't really like that saying because it insinuates that you know that you're right, right? And so I was thinking about how much that annoyed me or bothered me, that he's adopted this saying that Steve Harvey has. Like Steve Harvey has gone to school to be some expert in.
So now you want to dog Steve Harvey?
No, I'm just saying. My thing is when people come up and they start being life coaches and giving advice, like people call Angela Yee from The Breakfast Club.
Oh, so now you dog on Angela Yee.
I'm not dogging Angela Yee, but when did becoming a radio host makes her all knowing? I understand that it's really appealing to, you know, what's them columns that people used to write into and ask for like love advice and things like that. But then I just think about sometimes how you have to be careful about where you get your advice from and what makes somebody qualified to give you advice. Like we wouldn't go to a gynecologist to clean our teeth, right? We wouldn't go to the dentist if we have an issue with our foot.
But if you were a crackhead, would you go to a recovering crackhead for advice?
Yeah, because they have experience with
Experience, exactly. So sometimes people who may not actually have a degree or initials behind their name have experience. So they're able to impart wisdom into you, which you know nothing about. So someone who's been married for a number of years can sometimes impart wisdom into a young married couple and say, you know what? Sometimes it's better to be happy than to be right.
But this is my thing. People will call
so
Angela
I appreciate
Yee.
Steve Harvey for that because
I appreciate him.
It has brought me to a place
where he thinks he
peace.
Always right.
No, I give you the opportunity to find out through your self-evaluation
that you're right.
That I'm right. Yeah.
So he skipped to the end of the answer.
But I'm not always right though, because it's like, you know, just like 90% of the time. But.
Anyway. But people will call Angela Yee for things like they baby daddy. And to my recollection, Angela Yee don't even have any children. So calling on getting advice on how to deal with your baby daddy issues or baby mama, baby daddy drama.
You're going to get off Angela Yee, though.
I'm not dogging Angela Yee. I think Angela Yee actually gives some very sound advice. I'm not saying that she's off kilter with her advice. I'm just saying that sometimes we seek advice or help from people who may have some life experience, but they don't necessarily make them the best person to seek advice from. And so that's what annoys me about this little saying that you've adopted from Steve Harvey. Because
I didn't even know you was annoyed by it.
Yeah, it annoys me. It annoys me because just like me, when I say this ain't my love language, and you be like, oh, I don't believe in that love language stuff.
I believe in it.
Since when?
It had to grow on me.
Anyway, that's what he used to say. That he didn't believe.
See how I can admit that?
But what annoys me about the saying is that I also believe there are times where he adopts that saying, or he'll say it out loud because he truly believes he's right. And
not all the time.
No, I didn't say all the time. Yeah. I just said sometimes. I said sometimes you'll say that.
The only time I say it is when people ask me what kind of advice to give them in marriage, and I always tell them about what Steve Harvey said, because it works and it helps.
All right, let's get into this topic because we've been talking for about 10 minutes.
All right, so we're going to talk about 8 barriers to effective communication in marriage. And from what you've seen already, this article will hopefully help us. You ready to get into this? Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this is the part where we stop the podcast and we kind of put in our own little thing. Our intro plays into the podcast, so we always say, let's do it. Let's do it. And then that goes in. So remember, the podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Living the Stressed Life.
You can go to our website, livingthestressedlife.com.
You can go to our website, livingthestressedlife.com. Subscribe to the podcast. And we are in season 2, man. We have some great conversations on there, some great interviews. Our last podcast, we actually did a live interview with the stars of Love and Marriage Huntsville, Melody and Martell Holt. And it was a pretty dope interview. It was really nice to meet them and talk to them. Check it out.
So we had already actually started getting into the podcast, but since we said let's do it, I'm just going. Okay.
Cool.
All right, so thanks for everybody who's tuning in. We are recording with new mics, so if you hear me hit my chest a couple times, I have on a lapel mic.
Say it with your chest.
Saying it with my chest. So today's topic is 8 barriers to effective communication in marriage. And so we're going to jump right into it because we kind of went on a little tangent in the beginning. So let's talk about one of the first barriers to healthy communication. Scroll back up for me so I can be on the same page.
This is it.
Okay.
Choose a timing that is not conducive to a healthy communication. So this is something that contributes to poor communication. Choosing bad timing. So this it's so funny because this brought back memories of when, I don't know if we was married or this was right before we was married, but it was like New Year's and I had a Ford Focus and we was coming home from a New Year's celebration from the church and I got hit by a car, right? And I was trying to avoid this car because we seen this car speeding up behind us like crazy. So I tried to turn and get into the next lane, but the car decided to get into the next lane.
I'm sorry.
What?
It's not recording.
At all?
Hold on. Let me go back. It was like playing.
It's recording.
It's not recording right.
Decided to get into the next lane.
I'm sorry.
What?
There's something going on.
We're having technical difficulties, guys.
All right, just continue. So the car decided to get into the next
lane.
The
car decided to get into the next lane at the same time I did. I got hit. So it was Tiffany and I in the car. At this moment in time, Tiffany decided to talk about how I should have not let my insurance lapse. Did I? Yes. I remember that like yesterday. This was like, it had to be more than 14 years ago.
I might have been pregnant at the time with Jaden, so.
And it was so funny because I just got hit. And then she comes talking about, I told you should have paid that car insurance. Did you pay your car insurance? I'm like, really? Really? This is bad timing, and this is about to lead to some very poor communication. But that's a good example of when not to communicate about certain things.
You so shady and pity.
What say you?
think I agree with you. Yeah. I think it's also about, I was reading an article and it was talking about different barriers, and it gave the example of a perceptual barrier of how the reason why people have problems communicating is that they see the world differently. But a gender barrier is also in play at timing too, because
a gender barrier.
Because women and men think very differently. One of the articles that I was reading earlier, it says that women use on a daily basis about 22,000 to 25,000 words a day.
I believe that.
Compared to men, which use anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000. Yeah. So we use almost anywhere from 2 to 3 times more words than men do. But I also read another article that really talked about how the reason why communication can be a challenge between women and men is that we use different parts of our brains. When men communicate, they use
the logical side.
They use the left side of their brain, but they don't use any specific area. That's what it said. The article said that basically when men communicate, they communicate with the left side of their brain, and they communicate.
Is that the most logical side of the brain? It's like
yes, they communicate in a very logical, straightforward way, right? Mm-hmm. But when women communicate, they actually use both sides of their brain, where they
smart.
Where they actually combine logic and emotion. But that causes us to use more words because we use very specific parts of the brain. So you guys don't use any specific part. You just use the left side of your brain. So you communicate in a very logical way.
Oh, I understand. And let me give y'all an example to break that down. Okay. So you're driving and you get a flat, right? So logically, a man is going to be like, oh man, snap, I need to change this tire. Mm-hmm. Whereas a woman probably going to say, yeah, I need to change this tire. But they're going to use the emotional side too. Like, didn't I tell you we needed tires like 2 weeks ago? I could have sworn I told you needed tires 2 weeks ago. Now you got to change the tire in the middle of the night and it's hot outside.
Yeah, but I think another example of that could be us thinking about, all right, I need to change the tire, but I'm also on a busy highway. This will be what's the best strategy for me
that's
to change
probably
the
the
tire?
man saying it.
Yeah, baby, that's logic, but it's also emotion because you got to think about, I'm afraid of getting hit. Like, you start thinking about all these other scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. I think emotions is tied to that. But the example you gave is also a good example because we as women do that. But scientifically, women use both parts of their brain, which I'm not saying that necessarily makes us smarter, but it just says that...
I believe women are smarter.
I believe women are smarter too.
And I'm going to say that because, just being married for, 14 years, there's a lot of mistakes that I could have avoided if I would just simply listen. And sometimes I'm like, I don't listen because just didn't. But if I would have listened and just, because sometimes my wife would be right about something and have no previous knowledge about the subject. And so in my logical head, I'm thinking like, how could she possibly be right? She don't even know about this. And then she ended up being right. You know what I'm saying? So
that's my first time hearing this. So we have this on camera and we have this on audio.
Yeah, aren't you proud of me?
Yes.
You mess with it.
No, because you're going to mess up my microphone.
Cold-hearted, bro. I swear to God.
I'll pat you. There you go.
I don't want to.
But to get back to the point of bad timing, I think that's why sometimes timing can be bad for women when we bring up things, because we don't think from just one side of our brain. We think from both a logical side and an emotional side. Mm-hmm. Barrier 2.
Another barrier, the second barrier, is being judgmental will impede communication. Give us an example of that.
Being judgmental?
Yes.
if somebody says something like that, well, that was a stupid idea, or that wasn't smart.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think that's a statement of judgment when responding to someone, instead of saying, what were you thinking?
Right.
Or what was your train of thought, you know, when you made this decision? Help me understand, you know, your line of thinking. We'll say something like, well, that was stupid. You know, that's a judgment.
And I think that's very harsh. Like, my wife and I wouldn't say that to each other, but there's a look sometimes that says the same thing. And sometimes in marriage, you have to be careful about that, because she may think that was stupid. Like, I might do something, and she'll look at me like that. You know what I'm saying? And I might do something. Like, I'm not a handyman, but she forces me to be, like, at home, right? So, yes, you do, like, with a gun and everything. But, I was just kidding. But, I'm not a handyman. But, you know, I done put some new countertop, you know, took down cabinets and everything, but I don't, you know, that's not my forte. And one of the reasons that what I've learned throughout our marriage is sometimes I don't want to do some of these things, because if I make a mistake in something that I already didn't want to do, she gonna be looking at me like, and she don't have to say that was stupid, but she be like.
But Lemar has a look too, and the look is when I'm telling him something, he just keep making his little quick eye gesture to the side, like. And when I'm saying something to him, like, he'll ask me, like, yeah, just like that, where I been or what did I do. He makes this little quick eye movement to the side, and it's called eye language, because he's not the only person that does it. I've literally been in a room with him, his mama, his sister, and his sister's daughter, and something can be going on, and all of them take that quick little gesture, that little eye movement to the side. They don't ever exchange words, but afterwards, all of them had the same sentiment. All of them had the same feeling. And I'm like, y'all communicating with words, without words, using eye language.
Yeah.
And so what I learned in our relationship is, when I'm saying something to him, if he doesn't believe me, or if he want me to shut up, or I'm telling you, this eye gesture communicates multiple things. And it's so funny because it has no words. It has no verbal communication. But it can mean you lying. It can mean shut the hell up. It can mean, ooh, okay, so that really happened. Like, it just means so many things. And you have to know the players that use this eye language in order to know what's really going on. And that, to me, is a form of judgment. And I remember early in our marriage, when he would ask me something, like ask me a question like, where have I been, or something to that effect, that when I would be talking, he would make these little eye gestures to the side, and I felt like a kid that was being asked if I ate something. Like, did I eat all the cookies when I told you not to eat all the cookies? Like, it would make me feel anxious, because I'm like, why he like scrutinizing what I'm saying like I'm lying or something?
Because you had to eat all the cookies.
Whatever. So being judgmental can be a huge barrier in communication. And judgment does not have to passing judgment does not have to be just verbal. It can be nonverbal. It can be look. It can be body posture. You know, one of the things that we as women do, we snatch our head or roll our head, or we make certain body gestures, and that sometimes can convey that we're passing judgment, and we don't intend to. Now go on to
So a third barrier is constant expression of negative feelings. So the whole purpose of communication is to actually come together and agree on something, right? And sometimes, depending on what the conversation is about, people can get so caught up in their immediate feelings about whatever the subject is, and if those feelings are negative, that's what keeps getting expressed over and over again. So there's never an agreement. There's never a real conversation. There's no real communication, because those negative feelings keep being expressed over and over again.
Yeah. And I think that's where we talk about emotional barriers. That's where emotional barriers can really come into play. Like, if we feel a way, when we communicate with others, because we
Hey Teresa.
Because we feel a way, the way we feel becomes a barrier in us being able to effectively communicate. And it's mainly things such as fear, mistrust,
come into the camera a little bit.
Fear, mistrust, suspicion, going back to Lamar's little eye movements, right? His little judgy eyes, right? Little beady eyes. those
this is good. Let me read this?
Well, hold on, let me finish my thought. Go ahead. The nonverbal communication in that moment can convey something, right? It can convey how you really feel, which is a form of or an expression of negativity. Go ahead.
So it says, when a spouse constantly expresses negative feelings, it builds a spirit of fear on the other partner, which further suppresses the freedom of expression. So sometimes those negative feelings that keep coming about, the other partner is afraid to fully and truthfully communicate how they feel, because
did your battery die or something?
Express how they feel because the partner keeps expressing these negative feelings. So that impedes communication in marriage. And when that type of negativity, I'm all about energy. So when I deal with in the massage realm, when I'm dealing with people all the time, sometimes it's hard when somebody comes in with, I'll give you a perfect example. I had a client come in a couple of weeks ago, new client, and she was negative from the moment she got out of her car. And at first, I didn't understand that she had been negative with everybody before she got to me. When she laid on the table, I knew that this was not going to be a good experience. I tried my best to do everything I could possibly to break the barrier of negative energy, and I could not. So needless to say, the massage was a disaster. She didn't say that, but I just knew it was. I couldn't break the negative energy in the room, and honestly, I couldn't wait for her to leave. Hey, and I honestly could not wait for her to leave. And sometimes you can have the same thing in marriage. So a particular type of conversation will bring about that same type of energy, and you cannot wait for that conversation to be over. You won't even express yourself within that conversation because it's just going to keep fueling the negativity.
I think that happens a lot in our interactions. I recognize with my type of personality, I'm one of those people I'm always thinking about what makes things the most efficient, the most effective, the most streamlined, quickest processes, right? And sometimes when I'm talking to Lemar, I have a tendency, before I acknowledge the positive, to just simply say what I think I need, to just simply say what I think is not working. In that moment when I'm communicating with him, I'm not really focused on these are the things you're doing right. And what I realize is there's a huge difference in the way I communicate at home and the way I communicate in the workplace